and I will be your host today. With me is Morgan Griffin. She is the Associate Director of MBA Admissions at Duke in North Carolina, and it is my absolute pleasure to host this session with her today. Thank you so much for being here, Morgan. Just a quick overview of what's going to happen. It'll be an application walkthrough, exactly what has been advertised, going through the whole application, some do's and don'ts, some rights and wrongs, as quickly and briefly as possible, while still giving all the information that you're going to need and we're all going to need during this application cycle. We're going to try to answer as many questions as possible. But if you still have some unanswered questions, please take them to the booth later, and someone there will answer. Morgan will not be there, but you will get your questions answered. Um, and please post your questions in the Q&A tab, not in the personal chat or the event chat, as we will not be able to see them. So please, in the Q&A tab, and I'll be posting some polls just to kind of, find out where you are in the process or whatever tests. And without further ado, Morgan, please take it away.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Again, Morgan Griffin. I've been at Duke's Fuqua School of Business for 6 years now in the admissions office. I work with all of our applicants, but I specialize in working with applicants from India as well as the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. So if you are joining me from those areas, please feel free to reach out. I'm your admissions advisor, but you can also talk to any of our staff members. And in Fuqua fashion, I will also share, as you learn more about Fuqua, you'll hear about our 25 Random Things About You essay. And so in Fuqua fashion, it's always traditional for us to share one of those. And mine is, I'm actually welcoming my first daughter this year. She is named after where my husband and I got married, and then also my late grandmother. So we're very excited to welcome her, and she will be here in no time soon. But enough about me. I know you all are here to learn how do you get to join me in Durham, North Carolina. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen. I do have a brief presentation that I will move through as quickly as possible without sacrificing details, but hopefully give you a great overview of our admissions process, and then leave a lot of time for you all to ask questions. I know that sometimes you might have a unique question that we're not covering in our presentation. I want to make sure we get to as many of those as possible. And so the first thing I want to share about our admissions process is, and these are various members of our admissions team. You see here, Sherry Hubert, who is in the middle, that is our Associate Dean of Admissions, and then several of my other wonderful colleagues. But when we are looking at your application, so often I get asked, what does it take to get into Fuqua? What's the test score I need? What's this? What's that? There's no one data point in your application that determines your ability to get admitted or not. We take a very holistic approach. We sit, pre-COVID, we used to actually sit in a room together. We now do it over Zoom. And we talk about every application we receive, and we look at each of the sections of the application that you complete, and those are all weighted equally. So I say that to say that if you are sitting there and you're saying, gosh, I looked at your class profile and I have 2 years of work experience or 10 years of work experience, that's fine. I can't think of an application that every single section was absolutely perfect, hit every great metric that would be, that people assume. Every application has its ups and downs. And so I always like to tell people, like, think of it as a scale. Like when we're looking at your applications, just going up and down. And so not one component, not one test score is going to determine your success. We take a lot of time to really learn about you and really understand your candidacy. And so you should feel really good when you submit your application that we are taking time to read that. We actually, every application gets read by at least 2 different people. And roughly we spend anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour reading each application. So we take a lot of time. So I always tell people, when you're putting together your application, keep that in mind. Not something you should be rushing the day before you're ready to hit submit. We do take a lot of time to read your application because we know and think you've taken a lot of time to put together your application as well. So here are the 6 different components of our application. And you're going to see this with many business schools. We all probably have very similar sections. Maybe some questions are different, some wording or what we call it is different. How we evaluate it might be different, but this is pretty standard. So first, we're going to look at your academics. And so we're looking at either your whatever you submit, GMAT, GRE, or executive assessment. We do not have a preference. If you have the older version of the GMAT, that's fine. If you have the GMAT Focus or GRE Focus or whatever new test comes out, that's fine too. We're trained to evaluate those in the context of what is that test and how is it scored. We're not really comparing old GMAT or to GRE or anything like that. It's within the context of what that test is. We're also going to be looking, and we don't have a preference. So if you come from a quant heavy background and you take the GMAT, great. If you come from more of a liberal arts background, GRE executive assessment might feel kind of more your pace for a test. So we'll take either one, and we don't have a preference. We're also going to be looking at your undergraduate record. That it's important. We're going to look at what was the classes you took, how did you perform in those classes, what was your GPA. An important note about GPA is some schools, a lot of US schools are on a 4.0 scale, but internationally, we see that GPAs are on a very different scale. So sometimes a 10-point scale, 8-point scale, 100-point scale. It's important when you're completing your application to report what is your GPA. Don't start converting it. I've seen people do that and they actually start like short selling themselves. So if your GPA is on a 10-point scale, report that in a 10-point scale. Don't convert it to a 4.0. We don't require any English as a second language test or anything like that, so you don't even need to submit that. But again, we're going to be looking for this, and what this section tells us is, and helps us answer the question in some respect is, can you handle a quant rigorous program? Are you ready? And so some people, they might submit additional coursework they've done, but we also might see quant abilities in the work they do. So the academic section is not the only section where we're evaluating quant abilities or the ability to say, hey, I need to get up to speed on this and take the necessary classes to bring you up to speed. So that leads into work experience. Work experience looks different for everybody. And I will tell you that probably the resume you use to get your current job is probably not the resume you're going to want to use for business school. Specifically with Fuqua, what we're looking to understand your resume is not what your daily responsibilities are. We're more looking for a snapshot of what impact have you had? What have you achieved in your career? How have you managed people, projects, and budgets? So you are probably going to have to rewrite your resume. And so think of it that way. Think of it as this is your chance to really showcase, here's the great things I've done in my career, not so much those day-to-day responsibilities. We do want you to keep that to one page. So certainly don't feel like you have to list every award you've gotten, every leadership and involvement or community service project you've done. Use that space wisely. Also keep in mind that with the resume, this is the only component of your application that if you're invited to interview, that your interviewer will see about your application. So you also want to make sure that your interviewer and the admissions committee can understand what have your impact's been. If you're using a lot of really technical language, that might get lost. So just keep that in mind. You do want to write your resume if anyone from any industry could understand your impact. Next is leadership and involvement. Service. What do you do that's above and beyond what your job responsibilities are? So maybe you're part of a wellness or a committee at work, and that's not part of your job description. It's an extra responsibility you've taken. Or maybe you're part of an organization outside of work or a sports league or something. We also understand that you might be traveling a lot. Maybe leadership and involvement isn't as easy as it would be for some people. And so that's fine. You can also go back to things you were involved in undergrad. I just wouldn't leave this section blank. It's typically a section that does get left blank. A lot of times people think if they listed it on their resume, they don't need to complete this, but you do need to still complete it. So this is a section where I say it's okay to have it in 2 places if that does exist. Just don't leave it blank. If something is left blank in your application, we can't evaluate it. So just keep that in mind. essays. So we are going to ask you about, we have a short answer question that is trying to learn more about what are your goals post MBA? What are you wanting to do? Why does an MBA make sense to you? We want these to be realistic goals. And so just think through that. We're not going to hold you to that goal if you get to business school and it changes. But be thoughtful. Show that like, hey, here's what I'm wanting to do immediately post MBA. I want to go into consulting. At McKinsey, or I want to go, a startup business or something like that. Just make sure it's realistic. It doesn't have to be lofty. And then we do have our random 25 things about yourself. So we ask you to list 25 random facts about you, and they can be as random as you would like. I say they err more on the personal side of things, but I'm not saying personal in the sense of your deepest, darkest secrets, but more about what have your life experiences been, what has impacted you, what are things you enjoy doing, your hobbies, your passions, those types of things. I wouldn't use it to list 25 achievements you've had at work, because most likely you've maybe seen some remnants of that in your resume. So have fun with it. Do keep it to 2 pages. The other essay we ask is how you plan to contribute at Fuqua. So as much as you're going to learn at Fuqua, you're going to walk away with this new skill set and knowledge and expertise to take on that job you want to do post MBA. But we want to know, like, how are you going to contribute? What makes you unique that you can bring to the class, to this cohort to be involved? So whether that's different clubs, maybe it's a certain class you're going to take because you have experience, something like that. It doesn't have to be anything really specific, but how do you plan on being involved in our community? It's a give and take on both sides, and we want to make sure that our students are involved and that they are bringing a unique perspective to the class, or a unique skill, involvement, insight into the class. We do also have an optional essay, and that is a really great space if there's anything in your application you need to address. So let's say you took a test, and one test you really just did not perform how you were hoping to perform, and maybe something happened. I know during COVID, people were losing internet connections or were sick or anything like that. So feel free to use that. It doesn't have to be a full essay. It can be a bulleted list. Maybe you want to explain a lower than what you would have liked GPA, a gap in work experience, anything like that. It's truly free space. Just don't use it to submit like another school's essay. That's not what it's there for. It's kind of meant to be, hey, I just want to explain some of my application that I wasn't able to explain when I was completing it. Next is our letter of recommendation. We only require one letter of recommendation. We can actually only send the common letter of recommendation from our system to one person. I say this with a giant, if I could have like a thing pop up on my screen right now, a giant asterisk next to it. And that is, we prefer it come from your current manager or supervisor. But there are several reasons why that might not be the best person. Maybe you just switched jobs and your new current manager or supervisor doesn't know you very well. Maybe you work for your family's business, and unfortunately, mom, dad, aunt, uncle might not be, while they would write you a great letter of recommendation, they might not be the best. Maybe you have your own business and you don't have a manager or supervisor, so you might need to ask a client. Maybe you haven't told your supervisor you're looking at business school and you don't want to jeopardize a promotion or growth within the company in case your plans don't work out. So that is fine. Choose somebody that you are most comfortable with, that knows you really well, and we will submit that letter, that form that they will complete. I would just use that optional essay just to explain your choice of recommender. So while we say we'd like it to come from a current manager or supervisor, there's so many different scenarios that might not be feasible, and that's totally fine. We see it every year. We're not going to ding you for that. We more just don't want to see like academic letters of recommendation. While you might have worked with a professor on research or something, they tend to write more academic letters of recommendation. And since you are applying to business school, we want one that's more business workplace focused. So keep that in mind. You might convince yourself. This is also one where if you're sitting there saying, oh, but I know of the CEO of the company, and I think they could write me a great letter of recommendation. We want someone that works closely with you. I would rather a really quality letter of recommendation of someone that knows you really well versus somebody just with a fancy title. So don't get lost in that either. We're not evaluating your recommender and your choice of recommender. We're just wanting to understand, what are you like in the workplace? How are you working with people? You can always go see the GMAT common letter of recommendation and the questions they ask. And so certainly spend time talking with your recommender. Walk them through your story. Don't just ask them the day before the application is due to start writing that. Certainly give them ample time. As much time as you put into your application, give them equal time. So if you're thinking of applying early action or round one, I'd start asking now, and or at least identifying that person and talk to them within the coming weeks. As far as interviews, so this year we have changed our interview policy. And so for those that are first time applying, this is not new to you. For those who have applied before, you're going to say, wow, that's really different from what Fuqua used to do. So to avoid confusion, I'm just going to talk about what our interview policy is now. All interviews are done by invitation only, and we are issuing interview decisions on a rolling basis. So we will be releasing them. There's dates posted on our website of when they will all be released by. The release of your interview decision is not indicative of the decision, or if we liked you. It's just when we got around to reading your application, because we get a lot of applications. But you will apply, someone will review your application. We'll be meeting for a committee a lot more frequently. That's when we'll be releasing decisions on a regular basis, on a rolling basis. You'll get your interview decision. And then your interview is either conducted by a second year student or an alum of our program. We do offer in-person interviews in Durham, North Carolina, and all the rest are virtual options. So if you're joining me internationally, it's okay. You don't need to fly to the United States. We can do those virtually. But it's typically a 45-minute conversation. This is not a let me grill you on everything and all of that, but it's really a chance for them just to understand you and your story. As a reminder, they're only going to have your resume. They're not going to know test scores, what you wrote in your random facts, anything like that. So, and then after that decision is released, you complete your interview. That interview evaluation is submitted. It is another person will then read your application. So, but just keep in mind with rolling, it's not indicative. So let's say your friend and you apply in the same round and they get an interview decision a week before you. It is just luck of the draw of how your application got assigned to a reader and when that person got a chance to read your application. And next, we do have another section of our application, and it's completely optional. It's more toward the beginning of the application. And there is some questions we ask you, like if you're a first generation college student, so are you the first in your family that went to college and got a bachelor's degree? Do you also come from a low income family background? That's another thing. That does help us to kind of understand your story and how you've grown as a person, how you've had to work hard. So you're welcome to include that. You're welcome to share that. If you don't feel comfortable sharing that, that's fine too. This can feel like a very personal question to some people. Next is we do ask you about, are there any lived experiences you would like to share with the admissions committee? And this is completely optional. But has there been something in your life that really shaped who you are, is shaping why you're going to business school, has been impactful in your life? You know, some people have talked about parents divorcing. Some people have talked about, being the first in their family to go to school and navigating that process, or family health challenges or something like that. So again, completely optional, but just helps kind of give us context of here's something that might have happened in your life, good or bad. And maybe kind of says like, oh, wow, so them doing this was more impactful than just, the average person that did that or something like that. But you don't get dinged if you don't fill it out. We admitted plenty of people this year that didn't fill this out, and it's completely fine. But it is there for you if you would like to include that information. The other thing, I'm not going to spend a ton of time reading each of these. I do want to more focus just on our culture is, people do ask, what are we looking for in applicants? And of course, we are looking for like people that will be successful, all the things. But we are also looking for people that do align with our culture and our values. So they value diversity of people, of experiences, of moving teams forward. So do you fit within the culture of our school? There's no one question in the application that asks this. There's not a direct question about it. It just kind of gets trickled through maybe your resume, your essays, your letter of recommendation, and your interview. But that's some of the things we're looking for. We really just want to understand you as a person. Do you believe in the same values we do? And every school has different values, different missions, and all of that. And it's important for you to find the school that you align with, that these values resonate with you. Often, people will say like 2 years is a long time to be miserable. And if you don't agree with those values, that might feel a little challenging in the program. So these are very important to us. You'll hear about our pair principles. You'll hear about the phrase Team Fuqua that really is encompassing all of our values. So that's also something we're looking for in the application that isn't a direct question. Here are our dates. You do not have to memorize these, write these down. They're on our website, but just there for you to look at. Early action, I will point out, is a binding decision round. So if you are admitted, you are agreeing to come to Fuqua and withdraw applications from other schools, and that you will be matriculating. So keep that in mind. And then for anyone, we are part of the consortium this year. And so if you are applying through the consortium, just keep in mind, like when you apply in any of those 2 rounds, these are the 2 rounds that we'll be reading your application in context of. If you are an international student, we do ask you apply no later than round 3. That's just because we want to give you enough time to complete the visa process if you're admitted. So just keep these dates in mind. Again, they're all on our website, so feel free to look at them there. You don't need to memorize them right now. And then I work with an amazing team. I couldn't do anything I do without them, but I am in the office. These are all my other wonderful colleagues that are in the office. They sit on the admissions committee, they read applications, they do events and meet with you. So feel free, you're always welcome to chat with any of us, ask any questions, but chances are if you come to an event, you'll have the opportunity to interact with one of these wonderful smiling faces from my team. I will also share, here is our information on how to get in touch with us. Most people aren't calling us, so feel free to send us an email, and they can always connect you with who your admissions advisor might be, or who is best suited to answer your question. But we're always here to help. We welcome the opportunity. We all offer one-on-one chats, so feel free to check those out and talk about your situation and your application. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that way we can start to get to some of your questions. Hopefully I didn't go through that too quickly or talk too fast, but happy to take any questions from the audience, hot topics, and try and answer those questions and make the best use of our remaining time together.
All right, thank you so much, Morgan. That was really good. All right, we'll jump straight into the questions. I'll show them on the stage. All right, can you briefly tell us about applying in round 1 versus round 2? Also, what are the scholarship opportunities for international applicants applying in round 2?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's not a direct thing of like, well, if you apply in round 1, your chance of getting admitted are greater or anything like that. I have no statistics on that. It changes every year. What I will tell you is we want you to apply as early in the process as you feel like, as when you feel like your application is the strongest. So if you're scrambling right before that round 1 deadline and you're like, I haven't even had a chance to read my essays, hopefully they make sense, I would pause and say, maybe I should just apply in round 2 because my essays will be stronger. Round 2 just typically does tend to be a very popular round. It's one of our largest rounds, and that would be true for a lot of business schools. So just keep that in mind. Also, no secret here. We have an early action. We have a round 1. We have early action, then 4 rounds. We technically have 5 rounds of admission. As we go through the admissions process, like people are getting admitted and seats are getting taken. So just keep that in mind. But I would apply as early as possible. With round 1, you do get invited to, we have an admitted student weekend that happens in February. You start getting access to career services. You can start the visa process in February when that opens up. Whereas in round 2, you might not be able to start the visa process until March or April. So that's another thing, especially if you're an international student, I always say keep that in mind. As far as scholarship, we award scholarship in all rounds of admission. And we don't just have specific scholarships just for internationals and just for students that live here in the United States. We use the same criteria no matter where you're applying from, what your application looks like or anything. We only award merit-based scholarships. So that means we are using your application in reviewing you for scholarship of what your merits are. You would get, on decision release day, if we admit you, you would get notified if you're awarded a scholarship, and if so, how much. But there's no distinction between international and domestic students when it comes to scholarship. everyone is evaluated in the same way, and we do award scholarships in all rounds of admission, including round 2.
Thank you. Does Duke set a country-specific GMAT average, or do they use the previous year's class average GMAT as a benchmark?
So we don't have, like, when we're sitting in committee, we don't have like, hey, all test scores need to be this number, or if people are applying from this region, they have to score this and it's different for this region or anything. The class profile we post, we share that just as like, here's kind of like a snapshot of the way things shake out. But keep in mind, like, that's the middle 80%. And to get that average, there's people above and lower. For example, I read a lot of applications. Mostly the applications I read come from India. I have said, and this was the old test score, like, I have said no to even interviewing people with a 770. And I have almost stood on my head in committee to interview somebody with a 620 GMAT score. So it really is dependent on your application. There's no set test scores per region or anything like that. There's no benchmarks of things we have to hit. It's just magically how the class shakes out.
Thank you. What, according to you, is Duke's unique selling point?
One thing that I think when you talk to any top 20 business school, any of the business schools you talk to here as part of this application walkthrough event that GMAT Club is putting on, everyone's got great faculty, great career outcomes, great student clubs. We all have that, and we'll all sit here and talk about that. I think what is unique about Duke is where we are located. So we are located in Durham, North Carolina, which is in the Southeast. And I think a lot of times people think that when you are going to business school, let's say you're wanting to go into finance and investment banking, like, you have to go to school in New York City. Like, you're going to ruin your chances. Or if you're wanting to go work in the tech industry, you have to be in Southern California. And that's just not the case. Our students go everywhere. Cost of living is less expensive in the Southeast. But in addition, North Carolina is attracting a lot of big companies. For example, in Durham, North Carolina, we have Microsoft, Lenovo, Nike's here, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Bank of America is in Charlotte. And then hopefully, breaking ground soon, Apple is building its East Coast headquarters in Durham in what's called the Research Triangle Park, which is also open to and home to a lot of startups, tech startups, all of that. And so Durham, is really great, and you can go anywhere still, but it's a great place. It's very warm right now. In the summertime, it gets very hot in Durham, North Carolina. I always say that if you do live in India and you come here during the summer, you'll feel right at home, because we do get lots of rain and it is humid, but you get all 4 seasons here, low cost of living. And a lot of those big companies are coming here. So you don't have to live and pay the high rent in those bigger cities. You can live here, lower rent, and still be working at some of those companies. We actually had a lot of students. I have 2 alumni that I remain very close with. They are working at Apple. They're on the West Coast, and they said that they've just been crossing their fingers when Apple builds in Durham, North Carolina, because they want to move back and still work for Apple, but work in Durham. And so I think our location is really unique. There's not a lot of business schools in this area, but you can really go anywhere with an MBA. You don't have to be in the specific location.
Thank you. Are there any tips on the 25 random things questions? Finding quite difficult to come up with 25 things.
Yeah, it is hard to come up with 25 things. As an admissions person in our office, whenever someone new starts, we have to do it. So I feel your pain. I feel like when I was working on mine, the first like 10 or 15 came really quickly. And then the last like 10 or 5 of them or 15 of them, I really started to question, like, was I really that interesting of a person in my life? And so I think the way I would tackle it is, certainly this is not an essay that you're going to be able to sit down in one day or in an hour and crank out. It's going to take some time and reflection. So I think get down as many bullet points as you can. And then I've had some people that they have a notes on their phone, and as maybe they're going into work or thinking of things, they jot those down. Give your list to family and friends. They might come up with some. I gave mine to my husband, And he was like, I can't believe you didn't include this about yourself. I found that so interesting when I first met you, and all these things. Have fun with it. Don't overthink it. Um, be true to you. Certainly, if you write something, if you say, I like traveling, don't just say, I like traveling and move on to the next bullet point. I want to know, I'll sit there and say, well, I love traveling. What's your favorite country? Why do you enjoy traveling? Have you had a cool travel story or something? So I think just be true to you. It doesn't have to be like super philosophical or be conveying something. It can truly be, I talk about, if I was writing it now, I would talk about my daughter. I would talk about, I used to do obstacle course racing. So I talked about that in mine. I talked about how I met my husband, favorite travel locations, favorite food and why, all those things. So have fun with it, but it's definitely not one that you can sit down in one setting and come up with 25 things. That is very hard and challenging.
Thank you. How open is Duke to higher than average experience level, 8 to 10 years
Yeah,
candidates?
yeah. I think a lot of people they do worry about that. And I say, especially now, because I think COVID and what happened during that time really changed people's plans. I think a lot of people were ready to go to business school. COVID happened, and things really, really changed for people. Some people got laid off. Um, Financial situations, lockdowns, health things, like lots of things happened. So I do think people are trending in kind of the more in the higher range now than maybe what we saw pre-COVID. It's not like you have to have 5 years experience, and if you have anything less or more, you're not going to get admitted. We've admitted people that have 1 year of work experience. We've admitted people that had 15 years of work experience. I think what's important to keep in mind with work experience is, let's say you are on 8 to 10, the higher range of maybe what the average might be of any business school, any candidate, is use an optional essay to explain why. Sometimes, I will say for United States military applicants, they tend to have more work experience because maybe they did their service in the military, and then maybe once they transitioned out, started working, and they needed that time in the in civilian life to get those skills and know, hey, now's the time to go to business school. Or maybe people did teach for America, and so it might be a little bit longer. So I think just explain, like, why is now the right time? At 5 years, it just might not have been the right time for you, and that's okay. Maybe you didn't hit that ceiling. Maybe you're still trying to figure things out and what you like. That's completely fine. But we're not sitting here saying it's 5 years or nothing. There are people in our program that have many, many more years, and that's fine. They bring a completely different perspective, insight, and we do welcome that.
Thank you. If I have 3 years of work experience after graduation, which program is better for me, MIM or MBA?
I think that's really up to you and what you're wanting to do. Because we do offer a 1 year program. It's called MMS or MQM. We don't have like specifically like MIM. We have a different name for it. Um, the 1 year programs, those are really geared toward people coming right out of college. So 0 to like 1 or 2 years, I think would fine, but 3 years is the time where you might be saying like, well, let me just go for the MBA. So I think it's really up to you. I think it's like, what are you wanting to do? What skills are you wanting to do? It's hard to say just on like, hey, I have this many years of work experience. What should I do? If you and I were talking, I'd have a lot of follow up questions of like, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? So I think you could really go either way. And it really just depends on what you want to do with that degree.
Thank you. Most most Indian candidates have 3 years of bachelor's. In that case, will the profile be evaluated? If not, then what is the way to become eligible academically?
Yeah, that BCom degree, I hear that a lot. A lot of concerns. We do accept that degree. So it is equivalent to a 4 year degree of what we would see in the United States. So there's nothing else you need. Like, you are eligible to apply with that 3 year degree. If your country is one that always has a 4 year degree, but you just only did 3 years, that's when you wouldn't be eligible. But for those who are applying from India, if you have that 3 year bachelor, that is completely fine. You are eligible. There's nothing else you need to do.
Thank you. Uh, okay. I resigned from my senior sales position at Delivery Hero to pursue a small restaurant startup. However, I never filed the business for taxes. Should I still mention the startup as experience? Also, note the business failed and I had to sell it.
Oh man, we hear so often of people that start businesses and sometimes it just doesn't go according to plan. But I think still mention it because if anything, you might be working on something now, and so sometimes startups they just don't work out. It's and it can be tough going into the startup industry and all of that. So I still think it's worth explaining. I think it's worth explaining like what are you doing now because you've probably learned something and in reading that, if we were to admit you into the program, probably when you're in a class, you're going to talk about there might be a case where you're like, hey, I was in a similar situation and it failed. And you're going to add that perspective to the class. So I wouldn't look at it as a ding on you that, like, because it failed as you said or you had to sell it that's a bad reflection. I think if you're going back into the workforce or starting on something new like that shows grit and determination, so I wouldn't look at it as a negative. I think there's a way that you can really, while it might have been something negative that happened in your life, there are positive ways to explain that in your application.
Thank you. Is the analytical writing assessment score required if applying with GMAT Focus Edition?
So we are going to be looking at that overall test score. And so when you are applying, we ask that you send us your unofficial, at least your unofficial, but we will be looking at that whole component. But really, when we're looking at the GMAT, we're because the GMAT can be used across so many different graduate programs, we are really focusing on that quant score just because we are a quant heavy program.
So I think Pankaj is asking about like that's been removed from the focus, and some schools are now requiring a separate writing
Oh,
assessment.
no, we do
Uh,
not require like a separate writing assessment. No, we do not.
thank you. I'm a candidate with a traditional energy background. I'm eager to shift to the renewable energy sector. Are there any specialized programs that can support such a career shift?
Yeah, and I'll answer this, but then I'm also going to broaden it out a little bit just to make it applicable for people of all industries that might be looking to make a career shift. But we do have a big energy program here at Fuqua. We have our center for our energy center, which is called Edge. We do also have in our career management center a sector director that is um, focused on helping those MBA candidates recruit for energy or sustainability jobs. So we have that resource. But I would say business school in itself, if I can even like pull this back, and look at it from a higher point of view, is let's say you're in consulting and you're wanting to go into energy or vice versa or any career change. Business school is the great place for career changers and career switchers. I think for a while people were scared to mention that, but no one comes to business school saying I want to do the same thing I was doing before I came to business school, right? So a lot of people are using an MBA to make a career switch, and that's great. And that's why we have a dedicated career management center staff that help to work with our students, recruiting, putting together their plan, interview prep, resume review, all of that. So not just for energy, but they're there to help you with that career shift. And then our different centers are specialized. We have 5 of them. We have HSM, which is healthcare related, social impact, which is case, Edge, which is energy, Duke INE, which is entrepreneurship and innovation, and Cole, which is leadership. So there's programs there and centers that put on conferences and bring in guest speakers and all that dive deeper into some of those things that can really help students if they're interested in those different areas and topics.
Thank you. Is it possible to do a first year at Fuqua MBA and join the dual MBA MEM program later?
You can usually if you're applying dual degree, you'll start your first year at the other school and then come over to Fuqua. Just because there is a blended tuition rate, and then you do, if you were to start at Fuqua and then want to add it, you do have to get approval from the registrar's office. I will say specifically with a lot of these degrees and dual degrees is sometimes people are like, hey, there's just a couple like 3 or 4 classes I want to take at the other school, at public policy or the environmental school. And the great thing is that Fuqua, you can take up to 4 classes outside of Fuqua that will still count toward your degree. So some people just say like, oh, cool, I don't have to pay the tuition of 2 programs. I can do Fuqua and then take those classes at the other school and still get what I need. So is it possible? Yes, but typically people start their first year at the other school before coming over to Fuqua.
Thank you. My manager has left my current company 2 months ago to start his own firm. Since it's a startup, he doesn't have an official company email. Can I ask him to write my letter of recommendation?
Yes. So even, just provide their email address. Our team can send that out. But that is just fine. I wouldn't stress about an email address.
Thank you. Do you have any tips for candidates for non-traditional backgrounds, example liberal arts, to showcase quantitative abilities, perhaps through certifications, etc., or can the GRE or relevant work experience suffice? Thank you.
It depends. And so if we were talking one on one, I probably have a couple of questions to learn a little bit more about you. Typically, and I come from a liberal arts background, and so the thing is we do want those people in our class. It doesn't have to be all people that were business majors, all consultants, or anything like that. And so when it comes to liberal arts, a lot of times I do find that the quant section of those tests, they do tend to kind of maybe struggle a little bit. And so you can take additional like Coursera courses, MBA math, HBX. You can do any of those courses and submit your kind of transcripts from those, or if you have any other certifications. But if you are, let's say you came from a liberal arts background, but you are now in a quant heavy role, we will be factoring in your work experience as like, okay, well, maybe when they took the test, they weren't doing, maybe they didn't perform as much as well as they would have liked, but they're an accountant and doing things or something like that, or handling data analytics or something like that. So it's kind of a yes and but more quests. I have some questions, but certainly we like to have people that come from all different backgrounds. We're not admitting a class that's all coming from business backgrounds, I can assure you.
Thank you. Any data on percentage of internationals being sponsored for work after and Duke MBA?
That's hard because that is up to the companies and they don't always share that with us. So, our career report, we do have statistics in there. I don't know them off the top of my head that state how many of our international students got employed post MBA. But as far as like sponsorships and all that, we don't always follow or have that data because it is company specific, it's role specific, and all of that. So, probably the better question is to be asking companies what percentage of people do you sponsor, since Duke doesn't really have control over those sponsorships for H-1B visas or anything post MBA.
Thank you. Is there a grade non-disclosure policy with Fuqua's full-time MBA?
So yes, no grades are not disclosed. So that's the policy. That was a quick one. That was the quickest question we got here.
Does Fuqua do virtual admissions office hours similar to Ken and Flagler?
I am not sure what Keenan Flagler's office hours is. I can tell you that our applicants can schedule one-on-one chats with any of our admissions team members that you saw there. And so we do have a link, and you can go and see like what available times we have, and we can do those over Zoom or the phone. Usually they're about 15 minutes or so. So we do offer, kind of one-on-one chats. We don't use them to do like profile reviews or anything, but we do offer them to answer any questions you have about the program, about the admissions process, or if there's anything like really intricate that you need answered of how do I do this in my application.
Thank you. Just a quick question on the waivers again. Do they apply to master's programs too?
Does this apply to master's programs too? So you would need to attend one of their information sessions. So this is more focused on the daytime MBA program. You would have to check with them what their policy is. I still recruit for the MBA program, so I'm not sure what their policy is if you're attending one that's more daytime MBA focused, but I think they do. They're nice over there. I think they would.
Just another question about letter of recommendation. Do I need an LOR from my current manager? Having recently changed jobs, I would have spent only a few months in this role, and my manager also does not seem very keen on me leaving.
Yeah, so as we were talking about before with letter of recommendation, we say we like your current manager or supervisor, but there's so many scenarios where that might not make sense, and that's okay. And so certainly for your case, I think it's fine to ask a previous manager or supervisor. It doesn't sound like this current manager or supervisor might be the best person to write that letter of recommendation.
Cute. Are candidates with an MBA allowed to apply to Fuqua for their second MBA?
Are candidates with an MBA? I'm guessing this is an international MBA. Like if you went to, and I'm just going to pick a school logo that I can see at the top of my screen, like if you went to like Stern or Ross and Michigan Ross, and then you're wanting to get another MBA from Fuqua, we would be asking like, why do you need two MBAs? But if this was one maybe in your country, like I know in India they have the PGDM or an MBA program, then yes, you can still apply and be eligible. But if you would come to the US and you've done an MBA with one program already, it wouldn't make sense for you to do another one. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, well, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Morgan, for your time and the information and all the answers to the questions. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. We will be closing this session soon. I'll let you close, Morgan.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Please reach out. We're happy to help. Really excited that you're attending these events and kind of taking the first step in your MBA journey. So, certainly, best of luck. If our team can be of any assistance, please reach out. Myself or one of my wonderful colleagues, we're always happy to chat with you. And best of luck and look forward to seeing your application this year.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.